I am sick and tired of having political discussion and debate about the gun control issue being stifled by the grandstanding of the victim status of the kids in these schools. This has happened every time. It's happening again now. There seems to be a coordinated assault on the Second Amendment as a result of this latest shooting. And there's always a flurry of conspiracy theories, crisis actors, all that stuff. I don't believe any of that. Um, but I want to make this video to just put one thing out there. If you are the victim of a horrible trauma, like say you are shot by a shooter, or you witness a shooting, or even if you're just in the school and maybe you don't even see any blood or bodies, but you just have that experience and it's terrifying, you have my sympathy. That's an awful thing to go through. Trauma is very bad, and I'm one who believes very strongly in methodological individualism, and I don't want to see people hurt. I don't want to see, and not, even I'm sensitive to even like emotional things, right? So I agree with all of that. But the minute you enter the public arena and you start to use your victim status as a bludgeon to attempt to push through a political agenda, I think that you forfeited the sympathy that would normally be there. And I think that we have this every time. It's even worse this time. If you are going to go after my Second Amendment rights, my gun rights, then I'm not just going to sit back and say, well, because this happened to you, you automatically can say whatever you want, and it's just insensitive for me to disagree with you or to point out that you're an idiot, or that you're stupid, or that the policies that you're advocating are completely erroneous. But that's what I have to do because that's the way they're acting. And I should just qualify this. The vast majority of the students at these schools, they never get interviewed. They never go on television. They don't push any agenda. They might have political views one way or another, and I don't, by the way, mind if people have political views one way or another. And they have my sympathy. I can empathize with that. But as soon as you seize the spotlight that chance has given you, and you enter into the adult world, where you're going to push a political agenda, then you forfeited the right to just have automatic sympathy. You can't have your cake and eat it too. And in a way, and I think you have to look at every person individually, and I don't know the people involved here, of the ones, there's a couple who are getting the most time on television. I don't know them well enough to know their personal sense, but taking advantage of the spotlight that's given to you really destroys any kind of sympathy I have for you. Now, my high school never had a mass shooting, thankfully, but we had a couple times where students died. There was one who died in a fire, and there were two who died in a car accident. They were driving down the road way too fast, got in a car accident. One of them died immediately. The other one went into a coma and died several months later. And it was a traumatic event. They did counseling at the school. There were people who cried about it. There were people who, and these kids, these two people who died. I'm specifically thinking of the car accident version. They were acquaintances. I knew who they were. They were friends. They weren't friends. They were people I knew and I talked to every once in a while. I knew their names. I knew some basic details about them, but they weren't really friends. I didn't feel particularly touched. I had friends who knew them much better who were pretty upset about it, but it was fascinating to see. I'll never forget, there was one girl who was not friends with them. She didn't know them very well. They never hung out together or did anything together, but she was shrewd enough to realize that there was an opportunity here, and she jumped out in front. She did lots of interviews with the local newspapers. She gave speeches on it, and she mischaracterized their relationship. She referred to them as being good friends, which was not the case. And it was clearly a cynical, I mean, she may have had feelings of regret. I'm sure she wasn't happy that they died. I don't think that they were enemies or anything like that. But she saw what happened as an opportunity for her. And that's okay, but then if they are actually taking advantage of the tragedy, in an inappropriate way. She cried her crocodile tears, but then for her it was good for her career. Basically, she wanted to be a journalist. I don't know if she eventually became one or not. She wanted to be a journalist, and now all of a sudden the local newspaper wants her to write something about it because she knows the person who died, and it's big news as far as a small town goes. So I don't think that these students wanted there to be a mass shooting. I mean, I'm not suggesting that, but they are definitely taking advantage of it. And sure, fine. You have political views. All of a sudden, by chance, you're given the opportunity where there's a huge national spotlight that's going to be placed on you, and you have this gigantic microphone that you really haven't earned, right? You've been thrust into this because of some extremely rare, and it's important to understand here, events like this are extremely rare event, and rather than be broken up about it and grieving, and maybe these people are, but they look awfully smiley. They're really to go on national television like that's not an easy thing for a lot of people. A lot of people get broken up just by that. A lot of people get super nervous, and they're going on and they're perfectly articulate. They're not reasonable. The policies they put forward are asinine, essentially, and they are taking full advantage. They're not home like most of their students trying to get over this, grieving about it. We don't know how well they knew any of the people. There are enough people got killed that there's a good chance they did know some of them. But they're basically taking advantage of their death. They're using their deaths. And you could say there's a way to look at that and say, look, they're trying to make something good out of something bad. I can understand that, but I don't agree that what they're doing is good. They're trying to do something bad out of something bad, as far as my opinion is. As soon as you agree to that interview, and I think there's different types of interviews. If they're just interviewing you saying what happened, tell us what happened, as like an eyewitness, fine. But that's not what's going on now. They're giving a microphone to broadcast a political ideology. And it's a common one. It's not like it's only from these children. It's from something that a lot of people believe in what they're talking about, which is why, by the way, CNN is giving them, and I use CNN, but all of them are giving them this microphone because there's an affinity there. I have heard, and I haven't verified this, that there are actually pro-gun students who say pro-gun things, and they're just not being given the microphone, which that would technically be a conspiracy theory, right? The CNN and the other news stations are conspiring to silence them. That may not be true, though. So, there are victims of gun violence who have become outspoken gun rights supporters as a result. In fact, I just saw that there was a victim of Columbine who's a pro-gun legislator in Colorado. So that does happen, but you don't see them getting interviewed nearly as much. And I think as soon as they say, look, I'm going to launch into a political crusade, I'm going to use this for policy, I'm going to go after people's gun rights to one degree or another, then I'm sorry, you're not a grieving victim anymore. You've clearly coped with it enough that you feel competent to go onto national television, and you don't get automatic sympathy anymore. You don't get to play that card. You can't have your cake and eat it too. And it's frankly outrageous to see them say stuff, and I'm a huge not Trump supporter. Trump is like a goofy, terrible president, inconsistent, unprincipled, blah, blah, blah. But to blame him for this attack, that's blatant partisanship. He didn't pass any gun control. Yeah, Obama didn't pass any gun control either, and he had the House and the Senate for a couple of years. Right? Why is and it's funny how this is shared if you go through the comments of this proves that the Republicans are bad and the Republicans blah blah blah, and it's like, dude, the Democrats didn't do shit on this either. If you're gonna, as soon as you use the platform to advance your politics, then you're indulged. I remember after Columbine, this happened again. And there was a girl at Columbine who I think she had some stuff written in the New York Times, and Boston Tea Party wrote her an open letter. And it was a very kind letter and very like, I understand and I know your feelings, but if you're going to engage in a political discussion at the national level, you don't get to be the innocent victim anymore. You are entering the adult world, and that's the other thing, kind of a meta narrative here with these kids. And kids is not the right word. These people are past puberty. They are physically essentially adults. There may be some small differences, but essentially adults. They have essentially adult capabilities, at least most of them, most of the time. If they want to be treated like, if they're going to act like children, if they're going to go home and just curl up and cope in their own way, that's fine, and they can be treated like a child, and they can be treated like somebody who's not ready to be treated like an adult. But if they're going to seize the reins, the opportunity that this presents, right? The thing is, with people this age group, some of them still are not capable of being adults, and some of them are capable, and you can't tell just by looking at them necessarily. But you can tell by their actions. And when I see somebody on national television for the first time, looking directly at the camera and calling out the president and calling out the NRA and saying, "We're coming," that person is not a kid. That person is not a helpless child. That person is somebody who's definitely in control of themselves and a volitional actor. And whatever traumas they experience as a result of this, they are clearly coping with them well enough that they can handle that kind of media exposure. And if they're going to come for my guns or my gun rights, then I'm going to fight back. And I don't, and it doesn't matter that this happened to them. I'm sorry, it doesn't. And the stuff that they propose is just stupid. Let's do a background check. We should have universal background checks. The guy who shot up your school that you're so upset about passed a background check. Wouldn't have done a thing. Wouldn't have changed one thing. And again, you're blaming Trump, but you're not blaming the FBI, who was given repeated warnings. What's the argument? The pro-gun, the gun rights argument is that the police and the government will not protect you. Maybe it would be nice if they could, but they can't. And it's easy to not be too hard and say, well, it's logistically very difficult for them to do it. So don't be too mad at the FBI, because how many times do they get tips that don't go anywhere? Sure, fair enough. But the bottom line is they're not going to protect you. And so to say, well, you don't need a gun to protect yourself, why then? Because you don't need to protect yourself, the government will. But then we have this example where they were given forewarning at least twice, and they didn't do anything about it. Then they're obviously not going to protect you. And most situations aren't going to be that obvious anyway. It's going to be even harder for them to do anything. And the same goes through the gun-free zones. We have a gun-free zone at your school. There was a policy designed to protect you from gun violence by the government, and it just completely did nothing in this case, as it always does. In fact, if anything, it's led you to be more tempting targets. So, if they're going to make these stupid claims, I'm not going to sit back and not say anything. And I'm really sorry if that sounds callous or if that sounds mean, but I'm not going to sit back and just say, well, this happened to you, and so now you have carte blanche to say or do whatever you want. No, you don't. You don't get to attack people's rights and say, well, because this happened to me. And we don't even know, again, how many of your friends died. Were you it sounds like the actual heroic people were killed, so you were just there. Maybe. I hesitate to say that because we don't know about each kid, and I don't know what exactly happened to them. In a lot of ways, you could say they were lucky in the sense that they weren't killed. They weren't lucky in the sense that they still had experienced this trauma, but you're apparently fine. If you're good enough that you can go on TV and put on your immature rants, then you have to be able to, you can't dish it out and not take it too. And yeah, that's basically it. I think that and to be fair, I haven't seen these people personally say this. All right, I have not seen, and the main reason is they're not getting argued with in their face. All right, CNN is not putting them on the platform with somebody to refute them, which is bad enough. If they're going to give them a platform and say, just go ahead and put out your political points unrebutted, that is blatant editorializing. Forget crisis actors. That's a conspiracy theory, right? It's not just reported. You're not reporting what happened. You're going to these people and saying, tell us exactly what CNN wants to hear. And I keep saying CNN, but MSNBC, ABC, CBS, all of them, Fox even. So we haven't seen them actually, argue with someone, but I see it in the comments all the time. Don't make comments like, don't be insensitive, don't I can't believe that you would argue for gun rights. I can't believe that you would talk about, AR-15s at a time like this. Like, dude, now is exactly if you're going to talk about gun control right now, then I'm going to talk about gun rights right now. It's like they feel like they just have this monopoly when something like this happens, that the policy discussion can only go one way in a case like this, and that's just completely wrong. You're going to come for my rights, I'm going to argue back. I would rather not talk about this. My sense is that these events are so rare, and they've become more frequent since 2010, but they are still so rare that they don't warrant national attention. And here's the other fucking problem. Yeah, so sensitive, so sensitive. Yeah, you're so insensitive. We know that for some of these mass shooters, potentially a lot of them, the fact that they are going to be famous, that they're going to have their name out there, their face will be everywhere, is the primary motivation for them to do it. This is actually fairly well known. And so when these news stations plaster the killer's face everywhere and his name and talk about him 24/7, they are setting up in the minds of somebody else out there that this is the thing to do. And we know this. And they're doing it for ratings. They're doing it for money. It's so funny that they talk about the blood money of the NRA. How about the blood money for the ratings, right? The blood money for showing this stuff, knowing they know this. This is not a theoretical, this might be the case. There is dispute about how many people would be affected by this, but it's definitely some. So they don't care. They don't care if their 24-hour coverage is encouraging more attacks, which it is. They're going to blame the NRA and say, oh, the NRA and Donald Trump. Nothing that Donald Trump has done encourages this to happen. All right. Some of the stuff the Democrats have done, I think, makes it more likely. The gun-free zones, that sort of thing. Nothing that Trump has done makes this more likely. The media coverage does make it more likely. And the fact that, and I understand, it's higher ratings to show the face of the killer and to talk about his name and to go into his history and his backstory and blah, blah, blah. And there are parts of that that might be considered newsworthy. But, and they have no, and I'm not saying they should be obligated not to say anything. I'm saying the responsible thing for them to do would be to not say anything and to not show his face. But they're not going to do that because of the ratings. And the fact that this is in the minds of somebody else probably right now, giving them a motivation to attempt this in the future. And yeah, for every one of them who thinks that, there'll be, who does it, there might be 100 who think it and don't. But yeah, that's a problem, right? You don't get to play the victim. You don't get to play the compassionate, all we want to do is help, and then do something that is actively going to make it more likely in the future. So fuck your fucking your crocodile tears, and fuck your victim status. Okay, you are a big enough person, you're mature enough apparently that you can get on TV and challenge the president and challenge the NRA and say you're coming for the guns, and it's all vague about what they're talking about. We could go into 100 other reasons why they're, the stuff that they're talking about doesn't make any sense, and we'll get there when we get there. But yeah, you turned in your sympathy card. You really did. Like, for those who have not spoken out or who have only been interviewed to the point where they were reporting what happened and not editorializing with their opinions about what should or should not be done, then I hope you a swift recovery, and I hope you get over this eventually, and you'll probably never heal all the scars, but eventually you will feel better. The time will heal, if not eliminate. But if you're gonna come up and attack my rights, then I'm sorry, I can't just sit back. You're clearly well enough to handle that, right? I'm not gonna go to someone who's curled up in bed, traumatized, unable to go. Yeah, I'm not gonna go attack them. But you're on TV, you're up there mugging with your buddies, smiling like you're at a fucking plate, like you're at an amusement park, soaking up the attention. And some of these kids, I don't know their motivation. I don't. But the ones who are gravitating there because they enjoy it, right? The fact that it makes it suspect that these are fame hunting people, potentially, right? Not necessarily, but likely. It's just like the girl from my high school who jumps out in front, when someone dies, and like, I want to look at me, look at me, look at me. Let me talk about this. Let me write something in the paper. Let me give a speech about it. Let me talk. Only 100 times more. So yeah, I think that's pretty much all I'm going to say about this, and I'll talk to you all later.